Welcome to the Shave Horse build. In this video, we're going to cover the tools that I'm going to use for the video series. We're going to talk about the strategy that I use when I'm looking for the parts inside my raw materials, and then we'll lay out those parts on the stock that I have for the build. My shop has no shortage of big power tools, and I use them a lot. But when I'm working for fun, when I'm working for the enjoyment of it, I would much rather be using hand tools. And if you're getting into chair building, you probably feel the same way. So for that reason, I'm going to limit myself to the four main power tools that I have a hard time setting up a shop without. That's the joiner, the thickness planer, the bandsaw, and the drill press. And most of the work that I do with these tools is stock prep. So I will take time out during the videos to show you how to use hand tools to accomplish the jobs that those machines would accomplish. But I'll be using the machines for those steps early on, and then as we move further into the build, we'll be relying more and more on hand tools to finish the job. So let's talk about the parts that go into the shave horse and my strategy for finding them within a piece of raw material. Okay, so here we've got the first sheet of the plans. And this is a really good place to talk part strategy. When I'm looking at a piece of furniture, this is kind of shop furniture, but when I'm looking at a piece of woodwork like this, I'm looking for the parts that are the linchpin to the piece. And I want to make sure that I choose the right materials to go into each part. So when I see this, I think of this long rail as the big primary part that needs to have nice, straight, solid grain. And the swing arm is the other part that I want straight grain in. After that, I'm looking to the front and rear legs, and the head, and this centerpiece here in the stage. So that's where I would have preference for putting my straightest grain. After that, the parts actually get kind of small. So the stage sides, they are supported from below, so the pivoting action is going to have a little bit of force this way and that way and a little bit of force downward. So, you want to try to find a section of grain here that's pretty straight. But more importantly, if you can avoid doing a glue up, it'd be nice to have a nice wide board to pull your parts from. The stage itself is going to be supported completely from below. So, if you are left with a board that's maybe not your first choice, that's a good place to put it, especially since you're going to cover it with suede. So if it's ugly, you can hide it. The seat fin, the tail block, the center block, all those parts get laminated into the hole, so you can hide a lot of sins in between those two boards. The treadle, I generally glue the treadle up from four pieces, and I glue the mortise in. So that's one of the techniques that I want to show you how to do in this build series. So we'll go ahead and do that. The head I usually make out of a solid board, and then I chop the mortise through. So we'll show you that as well. The only change to the plans that I would recommend you make is on this cut list here, it talks about the rails being made of hard or softwood. I think there's a little too much flex in these rails when you use a softwood. So stick with a hardwood here and then follow the recommendations throughout. So the next thing we're going to do is set these plans aside and actually show you what my boards look like when I'm getting ready to break them down. Quarters. It's 20. So you're going to need between 25 and 30 board feet of material for this job. And I'm basically starting with all 8/4 or 2-inch thick stock. I'm using ash, but you can use any solid hardwood for the majority of these parts and you'll be just fine. The first thing that I did with my parts, with my materials, is to take them over to my chop saw and trim the ends off. And this is so that I can either find or eliminate any checking on the ends of the boards. And basically I keep trimming small slices off until I can't just easily snap the end of that board. One of these boards, this narrow board here, ended up having checks that were extending quite a ways in. And rather than continue to cut until it went away and lose that material, I marked the check on the end of the board, and then I worked around that when I was laying out the parts. If you have a project with odd-shaped parts like the legs in this shave horse, it can be really helpful to make a template for those parts so that when you're trying to locate them inside your raw materials, you can kind of interlock them and weave them together to get the highest yield. If you do use patterns, I highly suggest you use something with a really thick point to trace around them. That way you've got some fudge factor for your bandsaw or your hand sawing. If you start to get off track a little bit, you've got some time to correct when you're working with the raw materials and breaking the parts out of the rough boards. Something else you might notice is I've only laid out the key parts in the build at this point. So I've got my rails, my head, my swing arm, my legs, and because it worked out really well, I've got the stage center right here, nice straight piece of grain. The other parts, I'm gonna wait to lay those out and cut them until these parts are done. That way I have some material over here where I can really pick and choose where the board comes from in the grain, in case I run into issues with these parts here. The next step is going to be breaking these parts out of these boards and setting them aside until I'm ready to work them. All right, we've got our rough cuts made, and now we're ready to start making parts. We'll start with the base, and we'll cover that in the next video.